On today's episode, we travel to central Kansas to one of the best whitetail hunting areas in the United States. Join us as we go after a bona fide Kansas monster here on West Texas Outdoor Adventures. This is a very special episode for me today because I get to go back home where I was born and raised in central Kansas. This is some of the finest whitetail deer hunting in the entire United States, and it's very special for me because I get to see my family and I get to see a lot of their hard work in full action. They have some wonderful land and they've worked their butts off on it, and they've come up with some of the finest whitetail habitat you could ever hope for. So I know the caliber of deer that's on this land, and I'm very excited to get started. Day one of the hunt, we get up, of course, really early and get out there on one of the many food plots that they have on this land and get set up, and it doesn't take long. We immediately have deer on top of us. A big group of does move through, and right on their tails is our first two bucks of the day. The two bucks move in, obviously, and go right to work on the feeder, and they're two young deer. We're not going to mess with them, but it was very fascinating to get that close and see them, and they were very inquisitive. Actually, one of them came all the way over to the ground blind almost, and I thought he was going to come in with me, but he let it be, and they got their fill of corn and meandered on down the trail to see where those does headed off to. But that's a good sign. Morning one, we're already seeing bucks and does moving around, and that made us pretty optimistic for the afternoon. That evening we head out after a break and we go deeper into the woods into an area that has some really good food plots, some feeders, and it's right on the perimeter of an area where they've been seeing some of the big boys run does throughout the week. And we get set up there, we have multiple stands, multiple angles, and it's pretty much a perfect setup for that night. We get settled in the stand that evening, and it's not long we got action right on top of us. The first thing we see is our good friend Spike Buck. He comes wandering in, and not far behind him I can see a little bit bigger antlers and think we have a nicer deer, and a really nice young 10-point makes his way into the food plot. Now he gets a little bit past an evergreen tree and he puts on the brakes and looks up at me, and I've hunted long enough to know that look. He's pretty much saying, "Hey fat kid with the camera in the tree, I can pretty much see you," and he got a little spooked and backed off, and I thought, man, I think I just screwed that one up for us. But it worked out okay. He retreated a few yards, and then the allure of the food plot was too much, and he came right back in and went to work on some corn with his buddy Spike Buck. Spike Buck and the 10-point go to eating over there, and I can get the sense there's something moving into my right. And I look down there, and there's a bigger body deer coming through the evergreens, and all of a sudden, that 10-point over at the feeder, he shot his head up, and he didn't like the look of whatever was coming, and he started that magical stroll back towards my direction, and we know what that means. We're about to have a big problem in the woods. So this is pretty awesome. We get a fight right in front of us. The only downside, it was behind the evergreens below me, so I couldn't see it full scale, but man, you could hear it. It was a violent collision. My uncle had a great sight of it, and I hear the deer running off, and I expect to see the big 10-point come out of there victorious, but I was wrong. It was the wily old 8-point. He comes out of there, and I mean, the 10-point's over there snorting up a storm. He does not like being defeated, and the 8-point wanders out, and he's gonna go claim his victory over there at the corn pile. The 8-point goes over there to claim his prize at the corn pile. The 10-point's over there throwing a fit, and I think we've just created the perfect storm in the woods, and all of a sudden you can see those other two deer. They yank their heads up and they're looking to the north, and you can hear trouble coming. You can see branches moving, and they've pretty much just sent out an invitation to every buck in the woods that there's a giant fight going on in this food plot, and we're about to have some heavy action. I'm watching the eyes of that younger 8-point out there at the food pile, and they're staring right through the trees, and you can see them coming. You can see antlers moving real fast, and the first thing we see is a younger 8-point, a young deer that we're not going to mess with, but right behind him I could see a lot of branches moving, and at that point we got our first view of Big Papa. So now we've got ourselves a heck of a show. We've got 5 deer intermittently circling each other around this food plot, including this massive 8-point Kansas whitetail. As I'm watching this play out, I'm trying to figure out what my uncle might be thinking about doing here. There's a lot of good deer in front of us, and one of the younger 10 points starts to move towards where my uncle's stand is, and I'm not for sure if he's going to take that deer, so I move up to him, and well, I got my answer real quick because I saw his eyes. He was focusing on Big Papa over there on the corner. I knew that's the deer we were going to focus our energy on, obviously. So Big Papa is holding court down there right now, chasing off everything that gets close to that corn pile, and it's just amazing to see this massive deer interacting with these other bucks, and I'm just sitting there hoping and praying that this deer does what the other bucks have done and moves himself left and goes right under Bob's stand. Finally, some of the younger bucks go ahead and move left. They go right under Bob's stand, and the big 8-point decides he better keep task on them, and he starts moving, and I'm sitting there going, oh my God, this deer's gonna move right towards him. He disappears around that tree to the left, and I thought, here we go. I'll be honest, I'm shaking at this point when I see this deer disappear around the tree. I see Bob draw, I can't see the deer. I see the shot, I hear the deer react, I see him run past me. I can't quite tell if the deer is hit or how well he's hit. He runs off and I'm nervous, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking at Bob, and all of a sudden I see Bob crawling out of the tree stand. He walks over and picks up an arrow and holds it up to me, and I kind of got sick in my stomach at that point because it looks like he's missed this massive deer.
The big buck come around the corner, and he was chasing the little buck off, and as I went to draw, the little buck turned around to see where the big buck was. He caught me right in the middle of my draw and looked straight at me. The big buck looked straight at me. I had to finish my draw, and as I released the arrow, the big buck spun and turned around, went the other way, and I shot just inches right in front of him. This is one of them nights, you know, it all materialized. We had bucks everywhere. I mean, you're going to see the aggressive fight. You could see that was going to happen. I mean, I could just tell by the way the bucks were acting that fight was going to take place, and it did. And I mean, just twice that little buck, I mean, he messed me up twice on that big buck. I had him coming in 22 yards, not even knowing where I was at. He didn't have a clue I was there. One of the smaller bucks heard him coming through the trees, and he just turned and started walking to the sound, and he's walking straight at me when the big buck walks out, and there's just no way I can attempt to draw at him, because I knew he would catch me, so I just had to let it play out, and it finally played out, and then still the little buck still screws me.
And I'm telling you right now, my Uncle Bob is a hell of a shot with a bow. I'm not saying that because he's family, it's because I grew up shooting with him and I know the caliber of hunter that he is. But this just goes to show you how challenging bow hunting is, and this is why my family does this. It makes you get out in the woods, you have to respect animals, and it's not gonna be a walk in the park. And today definitely proved to be one of those days where it's gonna challenge your will as a hunter. It was a pretty amazing night to see all the deer that we did. Unfortunately, Bob couldn't get an arrow in that massive 8-point, but you know, all the action that we saw, the fights, the motion, all the deer moving, it's not by accident. It's a result of a heck of a lot of hard work by my family building a beautiful white-tailed deer habitat. It's a lot of hard work, and Bob's kind of modest about it, but it's not hard to see when you look across this parcel of land. They've put in a heck of a lot of work, and now they're reaping the rewards of it.
I mean, really, the habitat was here when we acquired the property. Just, I mean, a lot of trees, tremendous amount of cedar trees. We just went through the process of, we've cleared some spots. We've got five different food plots planted on the acreage. And then we went in and built this pond late last summer that gave us a good water source in here, because that's one thing that lacks around us is a good water source. So we decided when we put the cabin in that we'd go ahead and build a pond to give us a water source in here. We just try to manage what deer's here. I mean, we let a lot of deer go that normal people would probably shoot. We we just all try to make it a process and not shoot anything that's not any bigger than what we haven't ever killed in previous years.
So after that exciting evening, we got to get up the next day and go back to work with whitetail deer hunting. And Bob and I go back to a food plot we started on day one. We were hopeful a lot of deer were going to come in there in the morning. My father and my other uncle Rob were set up behind us about 150 yards back in an area that we hunted the night before, so we were hopeful maybe they would get a hold of something as well. Bob and I aren't in our stands very long at all, and we get a signal from Rob that he shot a deer. And so we wander over there. They've waited the right amount of time, and now it's time to start the tracking process on what he thinks is a pretty nice Kansas 10-point. We get over there to the area, and Rob thinks he put a nice shot on the deer, and I think he's right because we look down and there's blood all over the place. I don't think we're going to have to put in a lot of work tracking this deer today. We start working our way down this blood trail, and I'll be honest with you, I have never seen a blood trail like this in all my years of bow hunting. It was virtually a red carpet all the way to where this deer was at. That Matthews bow and Rage broadhead put a serious whooping on this deer. We didn't have to put in much work, and he didn't make it more than about 250 yards from Rob's stand. And it turned out to be a pretty nice Kansas 10-point.
He just come in from the west of me, and he spotted me right off the bat, and I sat still, let him walk a ways, and I could never get stood up. I sat him down, and I finally just got turned enough that I started to draw, and he looked right up at me, and he went ahead and kind of spooked off about 10 yards, stopped again, and by then I drew and got on him, and he stopped long enough to let me get the arrow in him and got a kill. That Rage broadhead did its job. I've never seen a deer pour blood out like that.
So Rob ends up with a pretty nice Kansas 10-point, a good representation of the deer that's on the land up there. And he told me he shot it so we could have something on video, which made me feel kind of bad, but I know the truth. It was a pretty good 10-point, a deer you probably couldn't pass up, and I was darn sure happy to see him harvest that deer. This trip back home was absolutely amazing for me, and it was a great representation of what whitetail deer hunting is like in the state of Kansas. It was amazing to see that many white-tailed deer, and it was also a testament to all the hard work my family has put in on that land, and it was great to see them reaping the rewards of all that hard work. This is an absolutely amazing piece of land that they've worked on and hopefully becomes a legacy for our family name. My grandfather worked very hard to make sure that his sons and his grandchildren appreciated the outdoors and all the gifts that Mother Nature has to offer. And I tell you what, I think he'd look down right now from heaven and he'd be pretty proud of the job that my family has done on this land, and it sure made for one heck of a whitetail hunt in central Kansas.